The first time I heard my son's voice crack with fear, it broke something inside me. He wasn't the type of boy to raise his voice or panic easily at 14. He was already calm, thoughtful, and protective in ways that made me proud every day. But when I came rushing from the kitchen to see him frozen in the hallway, fists clenched and eyes wide at the sight of our front door being pushed open, I understood the tremor in his voice. There she was, Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, standing in our doorway with a shiny key dangling from her fingers. And in that single moment, when my son shouted, "What do you think you're doing?" time itself seemed to hold its breath. Karen didn't expect him to be there. She didn't expect anyone to catch her. The look on her face, shocked, pale, then flushed red with the embarrassment of being caught, was something I'll never forget. My boy stood his ground, taller than she remembered, his voice trembling but strong. He wasn't just protecting a house. He was protecting his home. And I realized that this woman, who had tormented us for months with fines, threats, and smug letters about community standards, had crossed a line that no HOA rulebook could excuse. She had tried to let herself into my house. She had done it with something she called her master key. "Don't you dare raise your voice at me," she snapped at him, trying to recover her power. But it was too late. The damage was done. She had seen the fire in his eyes, and so had I. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my ears, but I didn't speak yet. I wanted to see what excuse she would spit out first. Karen's arrogance filled the silence. She waved the key like it was some kind of badge of authority. "I'm allowed access. This is HOA property. You're tenants of the rules, and I have the right to check compliance." Her words dripped with self-righteous venom, but there was something shaky in her tone. She knew she was caught trespassing. My son didn't back down. His fists were still clenched, his chest rising and falling fast, but his voice steadied. "This is our home. You don't have the right to just walk in. Get out." Hearing him say that, seeing the way he stood up, to hurl at something in me. Pride, yes, but also rage. Because my child should never have to confront a grown woman for trying to violate the one safe place we had. Karen sneered at him, like he was nothing, like he was some brat to be brushed off. She muttered, "You'll regret speaking to me like that. I run this neighborhood. You don't? Remember that?" And then, as if she hadn't just committed a crime, she turned and left, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was thick. My son's shoulders dropped, and he finally let out the breath he'd been holding. I hugged him tight, holding on to him longer than he probably wanted, but I couldn't help it. I could still feel the cold metal of that key in my mind, the idea that someone else thought they could invade our home, our sanctuary, whenever they pleased. That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did I. I could hear him shifting in his bed, restless, checking the lock on his window twice, then 3 times. He tried to act like it didn't bother him, but I saw the fear in his eyes. And that fear broke my heart in ways words can't touch. No parent should ever have to watch their child lose the sense of safety in their own home. I sat by the window most of the night, staring at the street lamps glowing on the HOA manicured lawns. I thought about every letter Karen had sent us, every warning about the color of our shutters, every fine for the unapproved flowers my wife had planted by the porch, every smug smirk she had given me at community meetings. It wasn't about rules for her. It was about power. And tonight, she had tried to push that power too far. The next morning, my son sat at the breakfast table, silent, poking at his cereal. He looked smaller than usual, even though he'd stood like a man the night before. I knew that silence. It was the kind of silence that carried shame and anger all at once. The silence of someone who felt violated but didn't know how to fix it. "We're not letting her get away with this." I told him, my voice firm. This is our home. She doesn't get to scare you here." His eyes lifted. Hopeful but doubtful, like he wanted to believe me, but didn't know if I had the strength to face Karen head-on. And in that moment, I made a promise not just to him, but to myself. I would not only stop her, I would make sure she regretted ever laying her hands on that so-called master key. What Karen didn't know was that she had woken something in me, too. A side of me I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't just a father trying to raise his son quietly under the weight of HOA rules. I was a man who had seen enough injustice to know when to fight back. And this time, the fight wasn't about fines or bylaws. It was about protecting my family. But revenge isn't something you rush. You don't just swing blindly and hope to win. No, you wait. You plan. You strike when it hurts most. And Karen had no idea that the moment she froze in my doorway, her entire reign over this neighborhood had started to crack. The days that followed felt heavy. Like the air itself carried Karen's smug shadow. My son avoided sitting near the front windows, and whenever the doorbell rang, I saw his shoulders stiffen. He tried to pretend he was fine, but the way he jumped at every knock told me the truth. He was carrying that moment inside him, the fear of someone just walking into our home like it was theirs. And what made it worse was Karen's silence. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't even send one of her snide letters. That quietness wasn't peace. It was a threat. I kept replaying that scene in my head. The way she waved that key like it was a weapon. She had called it a master key, but there was no such thing for our neighborhood door, at least. There wasn't supposed to be. That word burned into me. Master key, who had given her the right, who had made her feel like she owned every front door on this street. And if she had one for mine, how many others had she already tried? How many families didn't even know someone had violated their locks? The more I thought about it, the more the rage settled in, cold and steady. I wasn't going to storm into her house screaming. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of calling me aggressive at the next HOA meeting. No, I would dismantle her piece by piece. But before I could do that, I needed proof. That night, while my son finally dozed off, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and pulled out my old laptop. I started combing through HOA documents, bylaws, anything I could find that was public record. Hours slipped by until my eyes blurred. But one thing became clear. There was nothing in those papers that allowed board members access to private homes, nothing. Which meant Karen wasn't acting on authority. She was acting on arrogance. And if she had a key, she had either stolen it, copied it, or pressured someone into giving it to her. The thought made my skin crawl. My wife used to say that power doesn't make people corrupt, just reveals who they really are. And what I was seeing in Karen was someone who believed she had the right to own people's fear. That night, as the house sat silent, except for the hum of the fridge, I made a vow. If Karen wanted to play queen, I was going to show her what it felt like when her kingdom burned around her. The first step was cameras. I spent the next morning installing 2 new ones, one above the front door, another in the hallway where she had stood. My son watched me, his face curious but quiet. Finally, he asked, "Do you think she'll come back?" I tightened the last screw and looked at him. "I don't know," I admitted. "But if she does, we'll be ready." His eyes softened, like he was holding on to that reassurance with both hands. For the first time since that night, I saw a little relief flicker across his face. But Karen wasn't someone who disappeared into silence. She resurfaced at the HOA meeting that Friday, standing at the front of the room in her floral blouse and pearls, looking every bit the self-righteous leader she thought she was. She opened with her usual fake smile, talking about community, harmony, and safety standards. But when her eyes swept the room and landed on me, the smile faltered for just a second. She knew I hadn't forgotten. She knew I was watching. I let her ramble on about paint colors and mailbox heights until the meeting ended. And then I made my move. As people packed up their papers, I walked straight up to her, my voice calm but edged like a blade. "Karen, you and I need to talk." About keys. The color drained from her face. Just a flash, but I caught it. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand like I was ridiculous. "Oh, you're still on about that?" It was a misunderstanding. "I was just checking to make sure your door was locked. Safety, you know." People are careless. My blood boiled, but I didn't let it show. "Funny," I said slowly, leaning in just enough that only she could hear me. "Because my son saw you try to open the door. With a key. Not your hand. A key." Her jaw tightened. "You're mistaken." I smiled then, a cold smile. Maybe I am. But maybe the cameras at my house say otherwise. The flicker of panic in her eyes was all the confirmation I needed. She covered it quickly, plastering on her fake composure, but the damage was done. She knew she had slipped. And now she knew I had her cornered. When I walked out of that meeting, the night air felt lighter. Not because the fight was over, but because I had finally shifted the balance. She wasn't the hunter anymore. She was the prey. Later that night, my son asked me what I had said to her. I didn't give him all the details, but I told him the truth. She's scared now. And when people like her get scared, they make mistakes. Big ones. He nodded, quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I don't want her near us again." "Dad," I put my hand on his shoulder, meeting his eyes. "She won't be. I promise you. She's already lost. She just doesn't know it yet." And as I tucked him in, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about giving my son back the peace she had stolen. That was worth any war. The night after that HOA meeting, I found myself staring at the ceiling long after midnight, the house dark and still. My wife had fallen asleep hours ago, and my son's room was quiet except for the occasional creak of his bed springs as he shifted in his sleep. But I couldn't rest. Not with Karen's face still etched in my mind, the flash of fear in her eyes when I mentioned the cameras. That was the moment she realized she wasn't untouchable. And I wasn't going to waste it. The thing about people like Karen is that they thrive on control. Every smug letter, every fine, every glare across the street, it's all about making you feel smaller than them. But once you pull the rug out from under their feet, once you show them you're not afraid, they crumble faster than anyone expects. Still, I wasn't going to just expose her. I wanted her to feel what my son felt that night, cornered, violated, powerless. The first step was information. I spent the next week quietly digging into her past. Nothing invasive at first, just public records, property deeds, old HOA meeting minutes. What I found wasn't shocking, but it painted the picture I needed. Karen had been running this neighborhood like a personal fiefdom for years. She had fined families into selling their homes. She had forced widows to repaint their doors because the color wasn't community standard. She had even sued a young couple for putting up a swing set without approval. She won every battle because no one had ever pushed back hard enough. Until now, meanwhile, my son was slowly piecing himself back together. I could see the change in him. He still locked the windows twice before bed, still jumped a little when the doorbell rang. But he also watched me with a new kind of trust. Like he knew I wasn't just talking when I said I'd protect him. Like he believed I could actually win this. That belief put a weight on my shoulders, but it also fueled me one evening. As we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the houses, he asked, "Do you think she'll try again?" I looked at him, at the way his hands fidgeted with the edge of his hoodie, and I answered honestly, "Yes. People like her don't stop until they're forced to. But that's why we're ready." His eyes searched mine. "What if she comes when you're not home? That question gutted me. The thought of him standing there again, alone, facing hurt, made my fists clench. I leaned forward and said, "If she ever tries again, I want you to do one thing. Call me. Call the cops. And remember, she's not as powerful as she wants you to think. She's just a bully with a key." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in days, he smiled. Just a small smile, but enough. A few nights later, that smile would be tested. It was late, close to midnight, when I heard the faintest rattle at the front door. My wife was asleep and my son was in bed, but I was wide awake in the living room. Half watching the glow of the TV, at first I thought I imagined it. Then I heard it again. The scrape of metal against the lock. My blood went cold. I moved silently, stepping into the hallway where the camera had a clear view. I didn't speak, didn't slam the lights on. I just stood there, hidden in the dark, watching the door handle twitch. And then, just like before, it turned slowly. The camera's red light blinked, recording every second. Finally, the door creaked open an inch. And there she was. Karen. She slipped inside like she owned the place, her silhouette cutting against the streetlight outside. She thought she was being quiet, careful, but she didn't know I was there, standing in the shadows just feet away. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a rage so sharp it made my vision blur. Before she could take another step, a voice cut through the silence. "Mom? Dad?" My son's voice. He had woken up. He stood at the end of the hallway, rubbing his eyes, confused. And then his gaze shifted to the figure at the door. Karen froze. She hadn't expected him. She hadn't expected anyone. The moment she saw his face, her entire body stiffened like she'd been caught in a spotlight. His voice cracked, just like before, but it was louder this time, sharper. "What are you doing here?" Her lips parted, fumbling for an excuse, but nothing came out. She looked like a thief caught in the act, because that's exactly what she was. I stepped forward then, out of the shadows. "That's a good question, Karen. What are you doing here?" Her head whipped toward me, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She tried to regain her composure, but her voice trembled. "I was just checking, making sure the lock worked." "You can't be too careful these days, really?" I said, my voice low and steady. "Because it looks to me like you were breaking into my house." She stammered something about HOA rights, about community safety, but she couldn't finish a single sentence. The fear in her eyes told me everything. She knew she had crossed the line for good this time. And she knew I had the proof. My son stood there, watching, and I realized this was the moment he needed. He needed to see her squirm. He needed to see her stripped of that power she had used to scare him. I reached for the door, swung it open, and pointed outside. "Get out, Karen, and don't you ever step foot in this house again." She hesitated, her pride clashing with her panic. But in the end, she did what bullies always do when faced with someone stronger. She backed down. She muttered something about calling the board, then stumbled out into the night, her heels clacking against the pavement as she hurried away. The door shut with a heavy thud. And the silence that followed felt different this time. Not heavy, not threatening. Just final, my son looked at me, his eyes wide, and whispered, "We got her, didn't we?" I put my arm around his shoulders and pulled him close. "Oh, son," I said quietly, "we've only just begun." After that night, something shifted inside my son. He carried himself differently, shoulders not quite so tense, eyes a little brighter. He had seen Karen for what she really was, coward, and, more importantly, he had seen her retreat. But while he began to heal, I knew the battle was far from over. People like Karen didn't just disappear. No, they dug their claws in deeper, trying to prove they hadn't lost their grip. And sure enough, the very next morning, her retaliation arrived. It wasn't subtle. By the time I walked out to grab the paper, 3 envelopes were taped to my front door, each one stamped with the HOA. Letterhead, fines, 1 for improper lawn. Maintenance, another for excessive trash cans, visible from the street. And the last a staggering $500 fine for unauthorized surveillance equipment. My cameras, my hands shook. As I held the papers, but not from fear, from fury. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was sending a message. I can make your life miserable. I crumpled the letters in my fist, my jaw aching from how hard I clenched it. My son stood in the doorway, watching. "She's trying to scare us again," he said softly. There was no fear in his voice this time, just quiet anger. "She's trying," I answered. "But she's going to fail." That evening, I made a decision. Enough of playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. The first step was the footage. I pulled the recordings from the night Karen slipped into our home, watching every frame carefully. The way the key slid into the lock, the door easing open, her figure creeping inside. Then the look on her face when she realized she wasn't alone. It was all there, captured perfectly. And it was enough to destroy her. But I didn't rush to the police. Not yet. I wanted Karen to feel the walls closing in before the final strike. I started quietly sharing the footage. Not publicly, at least, not at first. Just a few trusted neighbors. People who had complained in hushed tones about Karen's harassment, but never dared to speak up. I invited them over for coffee, let them sit at my kitchen table, and pressed play on the screen. Every single one of them reacted the same way. Shock, followed by anger, followed by a slow smile of satisfaction. "She's been in my backyard before," one neighbor whispered, her eyes wide. I thought I was imagining it. I thought, maybe I was being paranoid. Another clenched his fists. "She'll find me for a crack in my driveway, but all this time, she's been trespassing into people's homes." Oh, she's finished. And that was the point. The story began to spread, not through gossip, but through the truth. Karen wasn't the queen of the neighborhood anymore. She was the villain. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. More fines arrived. More letters. She even showed up one afternoon while I was mowing the lawn, standing at the edge of my driveway with her arms crossed. "You think you're clever?" she sneered, trying to smear me with lies. "Nobody's going to believe you. I've run this community for years. People trust me." I killed the mower and walked right up to her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin to meet my eyes. "They trusted you," I said evenly. Past tense. But trust doesn't survive when people see the truth. Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "If you push me, I'll make sure you regret it. You and your boy both." Those words hit me like a punch, but not in the way she wanted. The moment she mentioned my son, my rage turned cold and razor sharp. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just said one sentence, steady as stone. "Say his name again, Karen, just once, and you'll see what regret really means." For the first time, she faltered. Just a flicker, but enough. She turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering under her breath. That night, my son asked me if she could actually hurt us. I looked him in the eye and told him the truth. She wants to. But she can't, because we're stronger than her now. And soon, everyone will see it. The next HOA meeting was when the cracks became undeniable. I didn't even have to say a word at first. The murmurs began as soon as Karen started speaking, neighbors whispering to each other, their eyes narrowing, darting toward her with suspicion. She felt it, too. Her voice trembled as she tried to run through her agenda, but the authority was gone. When the floor opened for comments, one of the neighbors I had shown the footage to raised her hand. "Karen, how exactly do you explain walking into someone's home without permission?" The room went silent. Karen's face turned white, then red, then pale again. She sputtered something about miscommunication and community safety checks, but it was too late. Another neighbor stood, then another. Voices rose, demanding answers, pressing her against the wall she had built for herself, and I just sat there, silent, watching her squirm. Watching my son watch her squirm. It was a lesson no lecture could have taught him. Bullies only win until someone shines a light on them. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. Karen wasn't going down without one last fight. And I could feel it in my bones. The storm she was about to unleash would test us harder than anything. Before Karen's storm came faster than I expected. 2 days after that HOA meeting, I woke to the sound of fists pounding against my front door. Not the polite kind of knock, but the heavy, angry hammering of someone trying to break the door down. My heart leaped, and before I could even move, my son came stumbling out of his room, eyes wide with panic. "Stay back," I told him, my voice sharper than I intended. He froze in the hallway, clutching the railing like it was the only thing keeping him steady. I opened the door, and there they were, 2 uniformed officers, standing on my porch with Karen right behind them, her arms folded and her lips twisted into a smirk. She looked like she was savoring every second, like this was her victory lap. "Sir," one officer said firmly, "we've had reports of harassment, trespassing, and threats made by you against this woman." My stomach turned. She had actually done it. She had gone to the police first, twisting the story until I was the villain. "That's a lie," I said immediately. But Karen stepped forward, clutching her chest with fake fragility. "He's unstable," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. "He's been stalking me, recording me, threatening me. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore." I wanted to laugh, but my son's terrified eyes kept me grounded. This wasn't funny. This was her most dangerous move yet. "Officers," I said carefully, "I have footage, actual video evidence of her trespassing into my house. With a key. Twice. And my son was the one who caught her." That made them pause. Karen's smirk faltered for just a heartbeat before she jumped back in. "He doctored it. Everyone knows he's trying to destroy me because he doesn't want to follow the HOA rules." One officer held up a hand. "Enough. If you have evidence, sir, we'll need to see it." And just like that, game shifted. I led them inside, my son following quietly, his hands shoved deep into the pocket of his hoodie. When I pulled up the footage, the room went silent. The officers leaned in, watching the grainy black and white clip of Karen sliding a key into my lock, opening the door and stepping inside. Then came the moment my son's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "What are you doing here?" Karen's face on the footage froze, caught mid-gasp. Guilty in every pixel. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. One officer turned slowly to Karen. "Do you deny this is you?" Her face turned crimson. "It's taken out of context." "I was checking." "Checking what?" I cut in, my voice rising despite myself. "Checking if you still owned us." Checking if my son was scared enough to keep quiet. My son flinched at the sharpness in my tone, but his eyes stayed locked on Karen. For the first time, I saw no fear in them, just anger. The officers didn't arrest her, not then. But they warned her, sternly. They told her she had no right to enter private property and that any further contact would be grounds for criminal charges. Karen nodded stiffly, but the hatred burning in her eyes told me this wasn't over. When the door finally shut and the patrol car drove away, I sank into the couch, exhaustion hitting me all at once. My son sat beside me, quiet for a long moment before whispering, "She almost got away with it, didn't she?" I nodded. "Almost. But lies don't stand long when the truth is staring people in the face." He leaned against me then. "It's just a little, like he used to when he was smaller." And in that moment, I knew the fight wasn't just about her anymore. It was about showing him that truth mattered. That standing up mattered. The following week was chaos. Karen tried everything. Emails to the board claiming I was endangering the community, anonymous notes stuffed in our mailbox calling us troublemakers. Even whispers that my son was a delinquent who disrespected authority. She was clawing at every shred of control she could find, but the cracks in her empire were spreading. Neighbors avoided her on the street. Families she used to intimidate began speaking up in hushed tones, sharing their own stories of her bullying. The footage had done more than protect MIT, it had planted seeds of rebellion. And then came the moment I didn't expect. One evening, as I pulled into the driveway, I found a small group of neighbors waiting. The widow from 2 doors down. The young couple Karen had sued. Even the man who had clenched his fists when he saw the footage. They stood there, nervous but determined. "We've had enough," the widow said, her voice shaky but firm. "It's time someone removed her from the board. And we want you to help us do it." I looked at them, at their tired eyes and hopeful faces, and something inside me hardened. This wasn't just my war anymore. It was everyone's. I nodded slowly. "Then let's end her reign." That night, as I tucked my son into bed, he asked quietly, "Are we winning?" I thought about it. About Karen's rage, her desperation, her crumbling power. I smiled faintly. Not yet, but soon. And when we do, she won't ever touch this house or you again. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't going to go quietly. She still had tricks left, and the final battle would push us all to the edge. The neighborhood had never felt so divided. By the end of that week, you could almost feel the lines drawn in the pavement. Those who were still too scared of Karen to speak up, and those who are finally ready to fight back. And in the middle of it all, she walked around like nothing was happening. Her chin high, her fake smile plastered on her face, but her eyes gave her away. They darted, sharp and restless, like she knew the ground beneath her was cracking. The group of neighbors who had come to me grew bolder. We met in living rooms and garages, hushed but determined. We dug up records, receipts, stories. One neighbor produced letters where Karen had threatened foreclosure over a late fee of $30. Another showed pictures of her sneaking into yards under the guise of inspection. Piece by piece, the monster she had built around herself was stripped bare. But Karen wasn't about to let her crown be taken without one last strike. It was a Saturday evening when it happened. My son and I had just finished a game of cards at the kitchen table, his laughter filling the room like music I hadn't heard in too long. When the sound of shattering glass split through the night, I froze. He did too. Then I saw the rock lying in the middle of our living room floor, shards of window scattered around it. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the door. And there she was. Karen, standing in the street, breathing hard. Her face twisted with something between rage and desperation. And worse, she wasn't alone. 2 of her closest allies on the board stood behind her, arms crossed like loyal soldiers. "You think you can humiliate me?" She screamed, her voice echoing down the street. "You think you can turn people against me in my own neighborhood?" Neighbors' lights flicked on one by one. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. The whole street was watching. My son appeared beside me, his hand clutching my arm, his eyes wide but unblinking. "Go inside," I told him, my voice tight. "No," he whispered. "Not this time." Karen stepped closer, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You've poisoned this community. You filled their heads with lies. But I'll tell you something, you don't belong here. You never have." Something inside me snapped. Weeks of fines, threats, sleepless nights. The image of her stepping into my house, the fear in my son's eyes, the lies she spun to the police, all of it boiled into a cold, steady fire. "You broke into my home," I said, my voice carrying over the street. "You threatened my family. And now you're throwing rocks through my window. You think anyone's going to believe you're the victim?" Her face twisted, but before she could spit back, a voice rang out from across the street. "He's right." It was the widow. She stepped onto her porch, trembling, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've all seen the footage. We know what you've done, Karen." Another voice joined in. The young couple, "You ruined our lives with your lawsuits. You don't get to ruin anyone else's." And then another. And another. One by one, doors opened, voices rose. The tide turned right there in the middle of the night. Karen had tried to make a public spectacle, and it backfired spectacularly. Her eyes widened, darting from face to face as the murmurs grew louder, angrier. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, the Queen had no subjects. The two board members flanking her shifted uneasily, then stepped back, no longer so eager to stand at her side. She looked smaller suddenly, her power crumbling in real time as the neighborhood she had terrorized turned against her. My son squeezed my hand, whispering they're standing up to her. I looked down at him, pride swelling in my chest. "They are. And you were the first one who ever did." The police came not long after, called by one of the neighbors who had seen the rock fly through the window. When the officers questioned her, I didn't even have to speak. The neighbors did it for me, recounting every threat, every violation, every abuse of power. And when I finally handed over the footage showing her trespass, the officers didn't look at me with suspicion this time. They looked at her. Karen was taken away that night, shouting over her shoulder that it wasn't over, that she'd make us all pay. But her voice sounded hollow now, empty, like even she didn't believe her own words anymore. When the patrol car pulled out of the neighborhood, the silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was relief. It was freedom. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now gathered in small clusters, talking, comforting each other, like survivors after a storm. Back inside, my son sat on the couch staring at the broken window. His voice was soft when he finally spoke. "She can't hurt us anymore, can she?" I sat beside him, wrapping my arm around his shoulders. "No," I said. "She's finished." But even as I said it, I knew one thing. Karen's fall wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the scars she left on this community, on my son. And the only way to truly end this was to make sure she could never come back. And that was the justice I planned to deliver. The morning after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood felt different. The sun rose over the cul-de-sac, but instead of the usual tightness in my chest, there was a lightness in the air. It wasn't just me. Neighbors came out with coffee cups in hand, talking in small groups, as if they were finally free to breathe again. Kids played in front yards where they hadn't dared to before. For the first time since moving here, the place looked like a real community. But peace wasn't enough. Not for me. Not after everything she had put my son through. The sight of him clutching my arm, terrified that night she tried her master key, haunted me. The way his voice shook when he asked if she could still hurt us. No, I needed more than her being taken away in handcuffs. I needed to make sure she could never return with her poison. So when the HOA board called an emergency meeting to discuss the leadership situation, I went. The room was tense, filled with homeowners who had once whispered in fear. Now their eyes were sharp, their voices firmer. Even the two board members who had stood beside Karen during the rock-throwing incident looked ashamed, as if the weight of her collapse had landed on them too. One of them cleared his throat. "Given recent events, we think it's best to remove Karen from her position as president." A ripple of agreement swept through the room. For a moment, I just listened. Then I stood, my palms pressing against the table, steady and unshaking. "It's not enough," I said, my voice cutting through the murmur. "She abused her power. She broke into homes. She threatened families. She didn't just misuse her role, she destroyed trust. If she walks away with just a slap on the wrist, what's stopping her from moving to another community and doing it again?" The room fell silent. My son sat in the back, watching me with wide eyes. I could see pride flicker across his face, the same kind of strength he had shown when he stood up to her at our door. The widow spoke up next. "He's right. She nearly ruined me. And I wasn't the only one. We can't just let her slip away." And then it began. Neighbors shared stories, not whispered this time, but loud in the open. The fines, the threats, the lies, every word added weight to the case we were building. By the end, no one could deny it. Karen wasn't just a bad president. She was a predator who thrived on fear. We voted unanimously to remove her, and more than that, we filed a collective lawsuit. With the video evidence, the testimonies, and her very public meltdown, we had enough to ensure she'd never step foot in a position of power again. The trial that followed was brutal. Karen walked into the courtroom like she still owned the world. Cara perfect, her lips pursed, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. She tried to twist the story, painting herself as the victim of a vendetta. But every time she lied, we had proof to break her down. Every time she sneered, the judge saw the truth in the footage we showed. When the verdict came, it was like a door slamming shut. She was found guilty of harassment, trespassing, and destruction of property. She was ordered to pay restitution not just to me, but to every neighbor she had wronged. The weight of it crushed her, stripping away the empire she had built on fear. The day they took her away for sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with my son. The air was cold, but I felt warm for the first time in months. He looked up at me, his voice steady now. "She can't come back." "No," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She can't. Not ever." We drove home in silence, the kind of silence that feels clean. And when we pulled into the neighborhood, something incredible happened. The same neighbors who had once hidden in their homes were waiting for us. They clapped, they hugged, they shook my hand. It wasn't just about Karen anymore, it was about all of us finally being free. That night, as my son drifted off to sleep, I stood by his door, watching him. He wasn't clutching his blanket in fear anymore. His breathing was even peaceful. And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge hadn't just given me justice. It had given him back his childhood. The broken window had been replaced. The scars in the neighborhood would take longer to heal. But for the first time, healing had begun. Karen had tried to wield her master key to control us, to break us. But in the end, it was her own arrogance that unlocked her downfall. And for the first time in a long time, our real home, felt safe.